we've barely just started and I've already finished half of my latte. Anyway, Q&A time. We're just going to be diving right in because I don't really have an intro. So we will be kicking off with questions that were left on April's Q&A video. And we are starting off with a question from my good friend, Adam Lobo, from his own YouTube channel. So big shout out to Adam Lobo, he's a tech tuber as well. Recently he's done a lot of videos on phones. But let's get to his question. Let's see. If we were to shoot in 30 FPS and put it on a 23.98 FPS timeline on FCPX Final Cut Pro 10, will that cause any issues? Based on my naked eye and exporting them, doesn't seem to have any issues, but wondering whether technically it might have. Great question. Short answer is yes, there will be some issues. Let me just fire up Final Cut Pro 10 here, and I will show you. My magic trackpad's not being nice to me today. No, not Premiere. Okay, Final Cut Pro 10, let's go ahead and create a 23.98 FPS timeline. So this is it. Here I've previously imported a timecode count up that is in 30 frames per second. So this is a 30 frames per second video. So 30 FPS video on a 23.98p timeline. Playing it back at a glance does not seem to be giving us any issues. If I go frame by frame, you will start seeing where the issue is. So 1, 2, 3, 5, it skipped frame number 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, it skipped 9, 11, 12, 13, 15, 14 was skipped, 16, 17, 18, 20, it skipped 19. So when you put a 30 FPS video on a 24 FPS timeline, it's going to skip frames every now and then. If you don't have a lot of motion or movement within your frame, that's probably not going to be very obvious. But if you have very predictable movement, then that movement is going to end up stuttering due to the dropped frames every now and then. So I hope that makes sense and answers your question. So to boil it down, yes, it will cause issues in terms of skipped frames, which can lead to stuttering motion. Is there custom or modified interfaces and ROMs in cameras, like when the camera can shoot 1080p 60 FPS and cannot do 720p 100 or 120 FPS? As far as I know, Magic Lantern is the only organization that's doing that. It does have a frame rate override feature inside the camera, but it doesn't seem like, as far as I know, it's not able to push the camera to shoot a higher frame rate than it already can. So is it possible to hack a camera to shoot a higher frame rate than it can? As far as I'm informed, the answer is no. There is no solution for that yet. As a person new to photography, is Adobe's Photoshop Lightroom a good choice for editing photos, or are there better options for the same price or higher? Now, Lightroom is probably the most popular, but I've heard of a good alternative called Capture One Pro. I hear it's better than Lightroom, but I've never actually got around trying it yet. But if there was an alternative, that would be the first alternative that pops into mind. And let's hop over to Instagram. How's life? I'm at like the very last leg of finishing my degree. Like there's literally a week left and then I'm just waiting for my convocation at this point. So it is a little hectic. I would still call it manageable at the moment. It's still going quite according to plan, but thank you so much for asking. This one. What workout plan / routine do you use to get abs? Well, number one, I don't have a workout routine. I don't work out, unfortunately. And number two, I do not have abs. That's probably a better question for Adam Lobo from just now for obvious reasons if you look at his Instagram feed. Perhaps he can even advise me a thing or two on fitness. Fitness is really not something I'm doing very well at. DSLR or mirrorless? Woohoo, good one. If you asked me before I got my EOS R, I would very probably have leaned to telling you DSLR. But if you ask me now, mirrorless. Mirrorless cameras are most definitely taking over. I imagine there would come a point in time whereby the market share of mirrorless cameras would just start swallowing up DSLRs if it's not already happening right now. And it's for a good reason, I believe, because I think there's just more advantages to shooting mirrorless than DSLR nowadays. On your series and lens library, do they have your dream lens? If they do, why don't you do a video on that? Well, the thing is, I'm personally actually not too sure what my dream lens actually is. I haven't made up my mind on what's that one lens I dream of having. But if it's just lenses I really wish I had, they certainly have a few. The Otus 55 is most definitely one of them. The Canon 35-1.4 because I really like 35mm lenses. And one they don't have is the RF 28-70 f2. That lens looks pretty good. Also, apart from photography/video stuff, what else that isn't related to them do you like to do? Well, I like to eat, and I like to hang out with my cats, if that counts. I also like coffee. I'm not a coffee connoisseur by any means, but I do enjoy a good cup of coffee. If coffee can count as a hobby, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would agree that it is. Alright, and we are moving on to questions on my YouTube post. I'm really confused with a macro lens and a telephoto lens. Please help me out. Okay, gotcha. There are actually two very different categories. Macro comes down to magnification and telephoto comes down to focal length. So a true macro lens is a lens that can pull off a magnification ratio of at least 1:1. So what that means is if I'm photographing a subject that measures 1 square centimeters with a true macro lens, the image of the subject that's projected by the lens onto the sensor should also measure 1 square centimeter. If I'm using a non-macro lens, a lens with a much smaller magnification ratio, then that image would be much smaller than a square centimeter. And a telephoto lens really just refers to any lens that has a long focal length. So they usually start at 85mm, so 85mm we would call them a short or medium telephoto lens, and something like a 200mm we would call them a super telephoto lens. So a macro lens can be a telephoto lens if it has a long focal length, for example the Canon 100mm macro or the Canon 180mm macro, but not every telephoto lens is a macro lens, because not every telephoto lens is able to let you focus close enough to achieve that life-size magnification. In fact, a lot of the super telephoto lenses actually have a very far minimum focusing distance. You cannot focus on things that are very near. They usually start at a couple meters away. So even though some telephoto lenses, they have a very long focal length, because they cannot focus on subjects that are very close up, they cannot achieve that high magnification ratio like a macro lens would be able to get you. Any idea or suggestions for Nikon to improve their sales? I mean, they're definitely not good at a particular thing like Canon's dual pixel AF sensor or Sony's IAF. I think it's actually quite simple. You either up your features or you have to lower your price. Because the other day I was spending some time with the Nikon Z7, Nikon's flagship mirrorless camera over at Lens Library, and to me it just felt on par with the flagship mirrorless cameras of the other brands like the Sony A7s or the Canon EOS R. It's probably arguably a bit better than the EOS R in terms of features, but the price tag was completely unjustifiable. Let me look up how much it actually costs in US dollars, because here in Malaysia it costs roughly 17 grand, which is outrageous for a mirrorless camera. Recommended retail, 3,396 US dollars for body only. That is so much money to spend on a mirrorless camera that's essentially on par with the Sony A7R III. I'm pretty sure if they priced it a bit more reasonably, their sales would definitely go up because, like I said, it is a very capable camera with a very complete feature set, but the pricing was just completely uncalled for. The Fuji GFX 100 was just launched. Maybe talk a bit about medium format and why it's so expensive. Yes, I absolutely would love to do some videos on medium format, but I'm holding off on them at the moment because very honestly, I personally have not had pretty much any experience at all with medium format systems, so I'm going to brush up on my own knowledge of medium format and definitely spend some time shooting across at least a couple of medium format systems for myself before I'm ready to share it with you guys. Is the Sigma 18-35 f1.8 still a good option for videography in APS-C? Hell yes! In fact, I'm filming with that lens right now. So the answer is yes, yes, and yes. I seriously cannot recommend the Sigma 18-35 lens enough. If you have the budget for it, go ahead and get it. Since you have dedicated a series to super expensive gear that you can't afford, what's some of your personal favorite gear you've used or owned? My personal favorite lens is my 42 Helios 85 f1.5 Chrome. Not ridiculously expensive, but very fun to use. My favorite lens that I actually own is probably still the Sigma 18-35 f1.8. In terms of the other lenses I own, a lot of them are actually previous gen L-series zoom lenses that aren't really that exciting nowadays. So I'm stuck in a weird situation whereby I have a lot of previous gen gear and I haven't really gotten myself to replace them or get anything new. But I am very much in the process of considering to get the RF 35mm f1.8. It's a relatively affordable lens that I think I might enjoy using very much along with the EOS R. What should the minimum handheld shutter be for a point and shoot like the RX100? Does the 1:1 ratio still apply, meaning 200 mils is 1/200 of a second? Yes, that rule of thumb does definitely apply to point and shoot cameras as well. But remember, it's just a rule of thumb, it's not the laws of physics, it's not going to guarantee you motion blur free pictures if you're particularly shaky on that day, or if you're shooting a very fast moving subject, then you might need an even faster shutter speed, or if your camera's on a tripod or you have some sort of stabilization going on, then you can get away with slower shutter speeds. What ND filter do you recommend at around a $50 price point? Looking to shoot some water or clouds, also just as a beginner, want to see if I like this style before I invest money in more expensive glass. For actually less than $50, and if we're talking about fixed ND filters, I would recommend HNY. I will leave some links down below for you to have a look at them. Is there a big difference between an FS5 Mark II or FS7 Mark II versus A7S II or A7 III in terms of cinematic look and color depth? Not really. If we're talking about the final image, they are very close. In fact, I think if you do a blind test, most of us won't even be able to tell which footage was shot on the FS series cameras and which was shot on their Alpha series mirrorless cameras. The main difference between those two lines of cameras are the designs of the cameras themselves. The FS series is optimized for motion picture, so the cameras are bigger, chunkier, has more controls, and the IOs are also more optimized for the motion picture workflow. The Alpha series cameras, they are compact, they're multi-purpose, and they can shoot stills. The image is going to be very similar in terms of a cinematic look, but the FS series footage is probably going to hold up better to a very post-heavy workflow due to more powerful codecs. When I drop any of the values on the RGB waves, the luma, which refers to the luminance, also drops. Anyway, for this not to happen, this morning I want to drop my red values but want the luma to remain higher. When I raise the luma, the red gets too clipped. Thank you for your help. The overall luminance of an image is actually a sum of the R, G, and B channels, so technically speaking, it won't be possible to not lower the overall luminance of an image by dropping either one of the components. But perhaps instead of lowering your reds, you can increase your greens and blues to achieve the same effect, because you're still playing around with the balance of the RG and B channels, but that's essentially what it all is. It's playing around with the balance of RG and B. Should I upgrade? I have a Rebel T6, does amazing pictures, but I want to upgrade just to have a second camera body. If you have any knowledge of experience with either a Rebel T7i or something newer in the price range of $500, what do you suggest? I want to stay in the Canon brand. Unfortunately, I do not have any experience with the T7i, but if you really want a second camera body, and seeing that you already have a DSLR, I would suggest going for a mirrorless as a secondary camera body. Perhaps something like the EOS M50, which is somewhere in the $500-ish price range, which is a very capable mirrorless camera. I would actually put it up against the Canon 80D in terms of capabilities. So then you have a DSLR and a mirrorless. Both are Canon. You can still interchangeably use your glass with the EFM to EF adapter that will very likely ship with the M50 if you buy the body only. You can use both cameras together when you need to, or if you just need either one camera, you can, depending on the situation, choose to bring a bigger DSLR with you or bring the lighter weight mirrorless with you. How and why does the size of the pixels on a camera's sensor affect or contribute to the camera's low light ability when shooting video? Now, I'm not exactly an engineer here, but the general explanation is something like this. The photo sites on an imaging sensor essentially collect light energy in the form of photons. So they are physically bigger, hence being able to actually collect more light. So more light means the less amplification you have to apply to the digital signal, resulting in less noise. Any recommended prime lenses for events? Already have a 50mm on APS-C. I would recommend you a 35mm simply because 35mm is my favorite focal length, but that really depends on the event you're shooting though, because a 35mm would really require you to get up close to your subject because it's a pretty wide-ish focal length, but on an APS-C, you don't really have to get that close, but on a full frame you do have to get pretty close. So if your event allows you to get relatively close to your subject, then I would most definitely get a 35mm. But if it's the other way around and you have to shoot your subjects from quite a bit of a distance, then I would recommend you get something, say an 85mm, perhaps an 85mm 1.8 that's not very expensive, plus it doubles as an excellent portrait lens. Any thoughts on future Fujifilm X100 series cameras? Really sorry mate, I don't really have a lot of experience with Fuji cameras, so unfortunately I don't have a lot of thoughts on them either. Hopefully that's going to change soon, but I really haven't been looking at Fuji that much. Things you really want to see in upcoming Canon cameras. Haha, this is a very easy one. in-body image stabilization, uncropped 4K, high frame rate video. So that is pretty much it for this month's questions. Thank you guys so much for the questions. Definitely keep them coming. Feel free to comment any upcoming questions down in the comment section below, or when it's time for the next Q&A video. As usual, I will do posts on my social media pages to collect questions. So that's pretty much it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.